Welcome to CAT. I'm here with the two kittens.
I almost got fired just a few seconds ago, so enjoy me while I'm here.
Our topic tonight is why do we have children with terminal cancer?
Or terminal diseases, I think.
Terminal disease and God. So let's talk about it. Go ahead.
Well, in the fallen world, there is death.
Didn't God foresee the fallen world?
Sure.
So he really didn't make the world knowing it would be fallen.
He really did?
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah. I mean, he had the foreknowledge of it, sure.
The foreknowledge of it means he knew that it would happen, and he created it. So he knew people and babies would get diseases and die. Explain that.
Well,
we were just having this conversation with someone else earlier.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I missed it, and
I
missed all the answers. That's like
we solved everything.
I missed the pre-studying for the test. So it's a fallen world, but I mean, even if he knows, I think we talked about this. Even though he knows somebody will choose wrong, like like Adam and Eve, he still gave them the option to choose right, and you can know all the things that are going to happen, but still give freedom in choice. And that's what caused the fallen world and why children have cancer. And
So the question I have is, let's just say that it's not wrong that caused the child's cancer. It was the fact that Goodyear decided to make rubber tires for the Fords, and they took their pollutants and they put it in the water system, and the mother drank that water while she was pregnant. And it wasn't wrong or evil or bad. It was just, man, people are going to die early.
But death itself is a direct consequence of sin.
Okay.
Right. That's kind of my point.
Yeah.
So why did God create a world where there's going to be, he knew there was going to be...
Because he still allows the free choice of man.
But you're talking about nothing to do with choice,
I'm just talking about events.
Bad things that happen.
Yeah, like
circumstance.
Someone's keeping the speed limit and a child runs out in the street and gets killed.
Okay, but if nothing bad happened, nothing good would happen because nothing bad happens.
So the argument that someone had with me this morning was, why couldn't God just keep a world where everything good happens and no bad?
Because that's not there's not a challenge in love there, right? A challenge to choose him and have faith in him. If everything good's happening, then what do we need him for?
So the atheist would say, so you're telling me that a sign of God's love is children dying of cancer?
Not a sign of it, but it's how the love works through those situations.
Let me interject here. I think that with that, I would say you don't want good in this world. You don't. You may want some good things, but you want the convenient good things. You want everybody to live in this fairy tale land where nothing goes wrong for you. But you are in a cosmic rebellion against God whenever you sin. And you continue to sin. That is your choice. So you, in and of itself, when you could do good things and you could be good, you choose against that. So you don't even want a good world because you directly go against that with your choices.
So in and of itself, me alone, forget everybody else, I am in, as you said, cosmic rebellion. Ooh, I like that.
Against God.
Rebellion against God. So just me and myself, I'm going to choose evil, right? And I'm going to reap the harvest of that. So let's get back to the point. What about a child who gets cancer and suffers immensely?
You put very much emphasis on that.
There's a lot of emphasis on it.
I would say this, that in the difficulties and the consequences of man's fallen state, these things happen. And just take that out of it, in nature it happens too. And just our natural state as we are as fallen humans, these are consequences of it. When God takes his almighty hand off of it and lets it play out as we have chosen, then this is a consequence of it.
So we're arguing it's human consequence, not a consequence of God's doing.
Yeah.
And one other thing to the person that said, why couldn't God just make everything good, nothing bad happens? And I've said it before, if everything was beautiful, nothing would be, right? Because you can't be, right?
So the sorrow and the pain and the difficulty is in some ways a good thing.
Yes.
Would you be able to say that if you had a child who got cancer and died?
I'd have to.
In the long run, you'd
have to.
notice that.
If you're going to be intellectually consistent, you have to.
Easier said than done?
Sure. Yeah, definitely.
Of course.
I think when you're in the moment of hard times, you can't see it. But every single time I've gone through something difficult, and I look back, I say, thank God that happened and that you got me through that, because that has changed me in this way.
You know what's crazy is that I hear countless stories of people that are atheists because of a family member dies, and that's what makes them atheists, because they say, why would God do this?
Mm-hmm. It's more of a hatred of God instead of an unbelief. I knew a guy down in Florida that lived in my neighborhood. This is when I first got into apologetics, and I used to go over there, visit him. And he was in his 50s or 60s, and ever since he was 4 years old, and his little brother, he was 6 months, he died at 6 months old. He had some sort of lung disease, and he basically lived his life struggling for air and died. And ever since then, he's just hated God. He said, if there is a God, I would kill him.
Go.
Well, don't you think?
Good luck.
Well,
I know, that's what I told him.
Well,
I
don't
said,
you think if God already knew this stuff would happen, don't you think he understands that what the child had to go through and would reward the child as such after? Because what's the child going to do? That's a baby.
God, I think absolutely understands our suffering with that, because his son died. His son died for us. So God knows the pain. He knows the suffering. He knows what we are going through. And I think that's a very important thing whenever we have this discussion, and be like, well, look, God didn't just throw you into this. God went through this as well. And that can show you that God can get you through this. If he's been through it, then yes, you can go through it as well.
When you say that, I'm always curious about that perspective, because God was waiting for his son to go through that and die, right?
Mm-hmm.
So he knows that the son's going to die and go to him. So in a way, Christ's suffering and dying was God's way of getting his son back.
If I knew that my child had terminal cancer, I would know that he's going to die, but I would still grieve over it. And I would know that he's going to go live with God and be in a better place than this earth. But I would still grieve over that, over the pain, over the suffering that is lived in that. And I think that God, even though he knew there was no other way than for us to be saved than Jesus coming and dying, he and all of heaven still grieved off over God incarnate dying.
Do you think that too?
I think being an atheist in those situations is a weird response to a family member dying, because that seems a bit more miserable to yourself. You know, you're going to be suffering from the sorrow forever, because they're just worm food. There's nothing. You know.
Well, in a way, and usually I say on the more objective evidence side, but I'll go to the emotional side. If you are an atheist and you look around you and you see all this death and suffering, ultimately that's a good thing, because in natural selection, the weak die and the strong survive and the genes pass by. That's our entire goal in life, is to allow suffering to take place and for the promotion of our species. So why be sorrowful over it? It's innate in us to be sorrowful over those things. It's innate. In atheism, we ought not to cry. We ought not to feel pain over those things, because there's nothing. It says we're just a clump of cells. We're molecules in motion. We're no more important than the lights in here, than the chairs. It's all the same. We're just biological. We just move.
So an atheist shouldn't mourn.
And that's a sad reality. And if you mourn and you're an atheist, I fully support you. But if you're going to take that perspective, then and look at it in its totality, then that's the reasonable conclusion.
And none of us have talked about the eternal perspective of God, that for us, the perspective is 90 years or whatever. But the eternal perspective of a child dying, I'm not sure it's nearly the same thing when we're considering eternity.
I agree.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what I meant by saying when you're an atheist, it's sort of a weird conclusion to jump to when a loved one dies, and instead of being happy that there is more after you die. So,
would you ever counsel somebody as a means to try to give them solace by saying when their child dies or a loved one dies, this is God's will?
No.
I would never say that.
That would be wise not to, I think.
I wouldn't say that. No, I would, just focus on, like you said, the eternal perspective.
How would you counsel?
Well, in a one single session.
Yeah, I mean the general approach. I mean, what would it be? Would it be, this is a sorrowful place. We're here for you. He's there for you in your sorrow.
Right, of course.
Yeah.
And and I would also add, just know that God understands the reality of the situation, and I'm sure He would treat this baby in His kingdom extra well, you'd think, because of this, if it had suffered or whatever.
It's always been interesting to me that Jesus wept when at Lazarus' tomb when He knew He was going to raise him. He wept and then He raised him. So the grieving process is very human.
Mm-hmm.
So very interesting. Are we done with that one?
I think so.
I think
Who
so.
has the jar of clay?
I do. I was hiding
We
it.
had to hide it from somebody who was sneaking.
I was just looking at the different topics in there.
You're not supposed to look. It's a secret.
Oh, is it my turn to pick?
I think so. Here. This is
Why
your
not?
job. I'm not as good at holding the
The
thing.
topics that I foreknew that we would
We should
choose.
call this the womb of knowledge.
Can a Christian be wealthy? This is interesting.
Can a Christian be wealthy? Next week on CAT.
Out.